Welcome to Health News and Views, a podcast dedicated to bringing some clarity to the health disparities in the Black and Brown communities. If you believe there's a connection between food, sickness, and health, then you're in the right place. Let's begin the process of unraveling the truth. And now your host, Lynn Pete.
Break down what's really happening inside of your body one bite at a time. Today we're talking about teens and snacks. And those chips, neon-colored drink, candy, energy drinks, and fruit snack. And the instant noodles may look harmless, but what are they doing to a growing brain? I bring this up because once again I'll mention my nephew. He's in love with snacks of all kinds, very hot snacks sometimes. He knows now that when we're shopping together, none of that stuff gets to go in the cart. Let me explain to you why, though. If you remember back in your own teen years, remember that you had some pretty fave snacks, too, or things that you would eat out of desperation because you needed something crunchy or sweet or had munchies that took over your brain and your stomach. But foods are, especially the snacks, are very, very different now. But first, our disclaimer that the subject matter provided on this podcast or any of our other published documents is for informational purposes only. Food, the final frontier, and our partner, Health News and Views, we do not attempt to treat, diagnose, or cure any disease or condition. Always check with your healthcare provider before making any lifestyle, dietary, or prescription drug changes. And now, we're going to unpack what happens to the brain and the body of teens after eating snacks that are loaded with, and you know these terms, you've heard these before, particularly from this podcast, high fructose corn syrup, monosodium glutamate, or actually MSG, the acronym, and excessive salt, artificial sweeteners, artificial colors, and flavors. And then I'll connect this with what we see later in life in older adults, where high sugar and salt are linked to memory loss, dementia, and even heart disease. And don't worry, this is not a doom and gloom episode. I actually have some real teen-approved snacks for swaps that will really taste good. And why is the teen brain so vulnerable? Well, the teen brain is under construction, particularly during adolescence. The brain is pruning old connections and wiring new ones. And it's strengthening that prefrontal cortex. You may have heard about that. The prefrontal cortex is the part that handles judgment, impulse control, planning, and even focus. And it's very super sensitive to reward chemicals like, dopamine. What does that mean? That means it hijacks the reward system. In other words, it will shape the food preferences for life. And it makes it harder for us to focus, to sleep, and even to regulate our own mood. So when we talk about high fructose corn syrup and food dyes and artificial sweeteners, we're not just talking about calories. We're talking about signals being sent to the brain that's still wiring itself in adolescence. High fructose corn syrup and sugar, common in sodas, sweet teas, sports drinks, pastries, and a lot of packaged snacks. In animal studies, when adolescent rats were fed high fructose corn syrup or high sugar diets, they developed a worse memory. There were signs of inflammation in the hippocampus, that's your brain's memory center, and there was problems learning and motivation. And it persisted into adulthood, even after the sugar was removed. In humans, high sugar intake in kids and teens is linked to weight gain, insulin resistance, higher risk of type 2 diabetes, and even fatty liver and metabolic syndrome. I know all too well. I was with my nephew at his last doctor's appointment. Now, all of these metabolic problems are connected to the brain, too. Insulin resistance and chronic inflammation don't stay in the waistline. They affect your blood vessels in the brain and the brain signaling. So dopamine and cravings, what are they? Well, a sugary snack or sugary drink can give a fast dopamine hit that gives you that kind of like, that feel good, like, oh boy, I really needed that. No, you didn't. Over time, the brain becomes less sensitive to normal rewards. And so teens may feel like they need even more sugar to feel the same pleasure, kind of like cigarette smoking, like the first one was really good. and then you're chasing that feeling for the rest of your smoking years. Hopefully most of you have already stopped doing that. But this can show up in constant snacking and cravings and mood crashes. And when the sugar wears off, you're not such a nice guy after the constant snacking and cravings have worn off. And what does that look like on a day-to-day to teens? Brain fog in class, irritability when they haven't eaten, they're hangry, that's hungry and angry, energy crashes mid-morning or after school, and difficulty focusing on homework. Who wants to do that without a snack or a drink nearby? Well, how does this tie into older adults? Well, several studies in older adults have found that high sugar intake is linked with higher risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. It causes cognitive performance to worsen over the years. That's slower thinking or poorer memory. So sugary snacks that teens rely on today are rehearsing a pattern that maybe decades later can show up as memory problems and dementia risk. What do? Take a look at the artificial sweeteners. Many teens and adults switch from sugary drinks to diet or zero sugar drinks loaded with artificial sweeteners like aspartame or sucralose or asulfame K. You may, if you're a follower of this podcast, you may have heard me do a podcast individually on artificial sweeteners, the colors and the dyes. And this is kind of putting it together to show exactly what's happening, not just to teens, but also to adults. So it does sound like, okay, you made a better choice because you got the zero sugar drink, no calories, no sugar. Yeah, but here's where the science gets a little complicated. As you may remember in a previous episode, in animal and human studies, it suggested that non-nutritive sweeteners can alter the gut biome, which is closely tied to the metabolism and brain health. It confuses the body's appetite and reward signals. So the brain expects calories but doesn't get them. It realizes that it tastes the sugar, but there's no sugar, leading to even more hunger later on. In one study, repeated aspartame, which is in most diet drinks, intake during adolescence in animals are associated with depressive-like behavior, changes in brain plasticity, which means that's how the brain adapts and rewires itself. And in adults, especially middle-aged adults, frequent use of low and no-calorie sweeteners has been linked with faster cognitive decline, a rough equivalent of more than 1 year of extra brain aging over an 8-year period. So for teens, this message is switching from sugar to diet products isn't a free pass. The brain is still getting powerful, sweet signals without the expected energy. And this mismatch can have consequences. And in the previous podcast, I may have said it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. If you know that commercial, you're older than you look. Anyway, MSG, salt and colors and flavors. That MSG taste, it's a food enhancer. It makes the food taste better. It makes the chips, the snacks, the soups, the instant noodles, and even some frozen foods taste much better than they really are. MSG, which the brain also uses is used as a neurotransmitter, can also be an excitotoxin. In normal food amounts, MSG does not burn out the brain cells. The blood-brain barrier tightly regulates glutamate, so the chance of you just exciting your brain to death is not going to happen. But the bigger concern in teens is that often MSG alone is not the problem. The high salt load that comes with many savory or ultra-processed foods, that's the bigger concern. High sodium intake over the years is associated, of course, with high blood pressure and stiffening of the arteries. And this is according to the New England Journal of Medicine, a greater risk of heart disease and stroke. So in older adults, what we're going to see, chronically high intake is definitely tied to cardiovascular risk. So why does this matter for teens? Because the blood vessels they're feeding now are the same blood vessels they're going to depend on when they're 40, 50, 60, 70, and beyond. Salt-heavy, ultra-processed diet that started in their teens kind of sets the stage for hypertension and vascular damage later in life. Be mindful also of the many bright-colored snacks and drinks that get their glow from artificial dyes like red dye 40, blue 1, yellow 5. You've heard me mention these before. There was a landmark study done at the University of Southampton, and they said that They found that certain mixtures of food dyes and preservatives were associated with increased hyperactivity in children. And regulators in Europe, the research doesn't say dyes actually cause ADHD, but they are very certain that the ingestion of certain yellow dyes can actually worsen attention and behavior, especially when it's consumed regularly. And this translates into difficulty concentrating in school, restlessness, and even more behavior challenges. In teens, high fructose corn syrup, sugar, dyes, salty snacks, artificial sweeteners are linked to inflammation in the brain, changes in their learning and memory, mood, and motivation, weight gain, insulin resistance, and blood pressure changes. In older adults, decades of high sugar and sodium are associated with the higher risk of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And then according to, again, the New England Journal of Medicine, that these higher risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death. Snack patterns we normalize in our teens today can show up as memory loss, confusion, and heart disease in their grandparents' generation and eventually in them. Teens do not have to eat perfectly, but small, steady swaps can make a huge difference. Teen-friendly alternatives. When you get that sweet craving for candy and gummy fruit snacks and high fructose corn syrup, sodas, try eating grapes. I've had them frozen. They're not so bad. Frozen grapes and mango chunks. These are really great. Fresh fruit. Carry some grapes, some berries, some orange slices, and maybe apple with cinnamon. And make your own smoothie. You could do that. You don't have to buy them from the store. You can make your own. Crunchy and salty snacks. Try some air pop popcorn. Maybe some lightly salted nuts and roasted chickpeas. The I'm Starving Marvin stacks after school. Don't reach for the instant noodles. It's laden with a lot of salt and other chemicals that neither you or I would be able to pronounce if we saw them. No pizza rolls, none of those energy drinks. You have plenty of energy, and it's all stirred up. How about try maybe having some whole grain toast with some peanut butter or almond butter or maybe a sliced banana. Try hummus with carrots and cucumber, maybe some bell pepper strips, or cheese stick with whole grain crackers and some fruit. And try to drink sodas that are water infused with lemons and berries or cucumber, or even a sparkling water with a splash of splash with real fruit juice. Maybe a sparkling water with a splash of real fruit juice. Herbal teas are nice too. For your sweet desserts, switch over from packaged cookies. Try to get a yogurt parfait and maybe some dark chocolate, or make your own baked goods. That way you can know how much sugar, and you know if you're cooking it, you're not going to put high fructose corn syrup in it because you don't know where that is. But long story short, our goal is not perfection, but it's just kind of upgrading the system. If you're listening or you have a teen at home listening, they deserve to be able to focus, create, remember, and dream. And that daily snack choices are part of the story. And if you'd like a future episode, we can talk about a 7-day brain boost snack challenge. I'm up for it. Until the next time, this is Lynn Peach, your host with Health News and Views, Food, the Final Frontier, saying what you eat today is building the brain you'll live with tomorrow. So always remember, eat to live and not live to eat. Make it a powerful day. See you back here next time. Thanks for stopping by. Peace.